right, so good evening and welcome again to Gen 2013 Men and Masculinities in the Caribbean, a course offered by the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies. And today we will have a roundtable on masculinities, feminism, and youth-led social change in the Caribbean. I've been teaching the course this semester and supported by our esteemed colleagues, Saajid, Hosein, Darron, James, J. Trim, of which two will be speakers this evening. And we're also joined by one of our colleagues and advocate, but who is now working in the state in Guyana to help contribute to our conversation. So I'm really happy to be here. My name is Amilka Sanatan, and we really come to reflect on how feminist, women's rights, and human rights activists and advocates have initiated a series of youth-led changes in the Caribbean, social changes in the Caribbean. And contemporary cyber and public organizing for gender justice have introduced new voices and politics in our landscape. Some of these changes have been achieved throughout the region. It includes mass-based mobilizations against public sexual harassment, the strengthening of public policy on this issue. We have the increased inclusion of women and LGBT voices in the media and also political spaces. And we have, very importantly, a stock taking and reevaluation of these inherited models and beliefs about gender, and particularly for us, about challenging patriarchal constructs of manhood. So this roundtable brings together the voices of youth leaders specifically involved in the transformation and reimagining of Caribbean masculinities for a fair, just, and an equal Caribbean. So I will do introductions just to big them up, but I'll do it quite quickly because we really want to get the substance of what I say. I'm no stranger to our classroom, would be Saajid Hosein. Saajid is an MPhil candidate in interdisciplinary gender studies at the UWI St. Augustine campus, and his research focuses on Indo-Trinidadian Muslim masculinities. And he's very interested in exploring the intersections of ethnicity and religion and the way people construct manhood. Now, Saajid is also doing very important work as a coordinator for the Young Men's Development Program by the First Citizens Foundation, where he's looking at supporting the work for at-risk youth, or what people are referred to as at-risk youth, or youth who may not even be in formal institutions or education, or may not have training, and seeing what capacity building they could bring about while promoting a politics of gender equality. Darron James, also a tutor in the Men and Masculinities in the Caribbean. He's pursuing his MSc in Applied Psychology at the UWI St. Augustine campus. He's a former guild counselor. He has served at all levels of student leadership, the club, as well as student government. He's also a tutor, as I just said, at the IGDS, and he really likes leading young people around gender justice and youth development. And then Jairo Rodrigues, a comrade, he's a Caribbean citizen, born and raised in Guyana, and he's a human rights and social development programs coordinator. He specializes in social change projects and advocacy methodologies on sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now, in this classroom, some of you all are very interested in what we call SRHR. So Rodrigues might be a good person you might want to liaise with. In 2015, he got his Bachelor's of Science in International Relations from the University of Guyana, and he recently graduated with his Master's of Arts in Gender Analysis and International Development from the UK. So much respect, big up Rodrigues, big up James, and big up Hosein. And I just want to start with the first question. How are you feeling, Saajid?
Good. Am I supposed to say anything more profound than that?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Okay. I'm feeling good, and I'm happy to be here and to be on this panel and to share my perspective. I hope that I could offer a different perspective as well from what we might usually hear in the realm of masculinities within the Caribbean. So yeah.
James.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. I am fair to fine. I cannot complain. Everything blessed. And looking forward to this discussion. I have some lovely experienced colleagues here with me. Maybe I myself might learn a thing or two. I'm prepped. Let's go.
Rodrigues.
Yeah, man, I'm super excited for this. Just to engage with you. I mean, I've been following some of your work. There's inspiration looking at, the panel, looking at how huge this class is. I'm just really excited for this. Thank you for having me.
Rodrigues, well, let me bounce with you first. Do you self-identify as a feminist, and why? And then what is your understanding of feminism in the Caribbean and men's engagement with it?
Oh, sure. Yes, simply from the gender and development perspective, looking at the new wave of feminism, I really identify with that because it goes without saying. When it comes to law, when it comes to policy, generally in society, we need to remove those barriers. We need to, within ourselves, looking at, our own identities, how we do, the jokes we make, certain conversations we have, not only that, but taking our own internal biases, learning about these things, education and all of that, and putting it into actual work and action. That is where I'd say I'm 100% feminist. I think that it needs to go way beyond our value system into actual progress in our society. So that's my gender development perspective on feminism. Looking at in the Caribbean, there's this poem I absolutely love, Elsa's Version by Christine Craig, a Jamaican woman. It was written just when the Caribbean was experiencing, our political independence, right? There was that wave of feminism when it comes to just before the Beijing platform, and that's when SRHR was really defined. But how she was speaking about women, me not bone and nobody back, me not rib out on nobody's side. Since the 60s, Caribbean women have been shouting that if we're going to be independent countries, you cannot just take us and say, oh, women are important without including us into what we call national development and our independence movement. So since then and to now, women have been shouting it. And as men, we need to shout with them. And more than that, take our positionalities and just make it work for everyone. Because feminism really is about everyone. When women thrive and win, generations upon generations thrive. Answer everything.
Yeah, man, you answer plenty of us, man. But I really appreciate it because I really appreciate your connection between feminism as a political movement and what we are fighting for, national liberation and independence and development, And sometimes people think there's a flight from the state or we must run away from governance, when in fact it is grappling with the state as an institution that we could have power with, becomes quite interesting for us to kind of explore and think about. So I think that was really good for us there. So James, feminism, use one, why? And what man doing that?
Me, I once identified as a feminist until I had a fruitful discussion with my colleagues and my friends, I should say. Let me make it sound so modest. My friends, Renuka and Neil, about feminists versus pro-feminist man, and understanding that women got into created feminism as their space, as their movement for their rights and their safety and their comfort in this world. And that was, I thought I was the best feminist until I realized I had to overcome this one hurdle of this sort of pride, because I thought it was just semantics until I understood. I had to come over that to understand I should not be encroaching on this space that they created for themselves, for their safety. So I had to take a back seat and be an ally, be a friend, a brethren even, in this fight, in this continuous fight, struggle and toil to create this beautiful space where women, LGBT plus and others can have beautiful space to live in. So I am a pro-feminist man. I'm a feminist brethren, even.
I think there's a quite powerful reflection too, James. Well, for the class, not summarizing your views. I guess I just want to teach a little bit before I just let you all fly. That was important because I share the other view where I identify as feminist myself. However, globally, a lot of men don't identify feminism for the very arguments you just established. The people pro that you really an advocate for feminist principles. I try to argue that, well, in the Caribbean experience and what I was introduced and socialized into, it was identification. Feminism was the way we repudiated patriarchal masculinity. So it's interesting to see it's not really one right or wrong, but to see how different ways we come through the movement and kind of understand the politics and the way we position ourselves as allies. You know, for me, I'm an ally in terms of the ethics, but I'm really a comrade, you know. I'm fighting for water and I'm fighting for gender justice. So I just really like how you bring up that conversation, which is good for the class to hear, to know it's not just one thing and it's like a church or a temple or a mosque, you know. It's like, no, we are thinkers in a space trying to make peace and understand our way in the world. So enough respect, man. Hosein, why feminism?
Yeah, I'm a feminist. I also prefer to just say I'm a feminist as opposed to pro-feminism. The reason why I say that is because although feminism was, you know, created for women and is primarily for women, feminism in many ways benefits me. It has saved me and it's taught me a lot about myself. So I choose to identify as a feminist, and I think that my politics, my view on the world are very much in line with what we call feminism. So I'm very comfortable calling myself a feminist, because feminism, I think we need to understand it's more than just a movement. It's also a philosophy. It is a scholarly field. It's a field of scholarly fields, and it's a body of knowledge. It's an epistemology, and it's an epistemology that I draw from in my work as a researcher, as an MPhil student, as someone who wants to do a PhD in the future. Feminism is one of my foundational scholarly and theoretical frameworks. That's one of the main ways in which I view feminism. And I think using feminist epistemology in your work as a researcher and as a thinker makes you a feminist. And so that's why I identify as a feminist, and that's where my relationship with feminism primarily stands.
Claro. And it's interesting the point of epistemology and standpoint and about knowledge creation. And I think that is very relevant to the way that we work crafting our essays and how we establish standpoints in our work as moving ahead. But let's just go one time. Hosein, tell me, what initiatives have you coordinated or contributed to on gender justice that you think brought about some successes in your work that you wanted to see?
Oh wow. Well, a lot of my work with feminist politics, and if we're talking like outside of the classroom and like in the real world, right? Not that the classroom is in the real world, but it started in UWI as an undergrad, joining groups like the Socialist Student Conference, which Amilca started or founded, and IGDS Ignite, which is still up and running, and kicking and doing really well. In fact, under Ignite, the initiative of Catcalls of UE was started, which was built upon Catcalls of NYC, which has become a global movement where you essentially chalk messages that you get on Instagram from women who talk about their experiences of sexual harassment within a specific place. And if you could chalk that message right where the harassment happened, that's what we started doing with a small group of Ignite students in UE. And I'm no longer involved in the project, but I was there when it started and I helped them with the social media aspects of it. And I think it was a really impactful and continues to be a very impactful project with regards to highlighting sexual harassment on campus, how we as an academic institution, we're not immune to that. And it's something that happens on a daily basis to women on campus. And we've done a really, and right now Ignite is continuing to do a really good job at highlighting what's going on and using the chalk back method to bring awareness to this issue on campus. Right now, I'm also, as Amilca would have alluded to before, I am the coordinator for the Young Men's Development Program, which is a project of First Citizens Foundation. And my work capacity is mostly administrative, but I have the privilege and honor of interacting with and working with young men who benefit from the program. The program is essentially about, teaching them about the working world and you know, developing them to, you know, be able to assimilate into society. But more than that, as Amilcar said, it's about advancing agenda politics with them. We're not just trying to teach them to be professionals and to, like, you know, be CEOs in the workplace, but to deconstruct what they learn about masculinity from a very young age. And the very things that, you know, hold young men back, the very things that are associated with, you know, young men at risk, have a lot to do with masculinity and the constraints and the ideals that young men have to live up to, right? So it's about deconstructing that and, in a way, hoping to liberate them from that. And so I think for me that those are some of the most impactful things that I've done. And I think they could all be summarized under challenging our notions and understanding of masculinity as something that in some instances put women in very harmful and vulnerable positions, like with catcalls, but also put men in harmful and vulnerable positions, like with the project that I'm working on with FC. So, yeah.
Many thanks, Saajid. I will bring in James. You are also a student organizer, and a lot of your work was established at the UWI. You might want to speak to some of those examples, or you could go much wider. Let us know some of the initiatives you took up around gender justice.
I will go. Actually, I'll go specific. I love what Saajid said about challenging our notions of masculinity and even femininity and everything, you know? I love challenging these notions on a personal level. There's nothing better than hearing someone's perspective and conversing with them. I love the grassroots feminism going up on the square, trying to sign a petition. I have done that regarding women's safety, gender-based violence, to carry to the Prime Minister's office, hearing the perspectives of men and women on gender-based violence, on how women dress and women's place in society and so on. I love these kind of conversations where I can impart my knowledge. At least you could never say that I can never hear it before. Can't say that. I at least hear it from one person now. But that person is me, because I know I impart something making sense. Not just something you hear all over the place, but something making sense to you. Hopefully that could change your notion. Right? On a more organizational level, working with IGDS Ignite, a beautiful group. And I encourage everyone here to join. It starts you with applying the knowledge that you learn here out there. So the concepts that you learn here, masculine privilege and sexual division of labor, homophobia, and so on, it's applied on a grassroots level, understanding policy, seeing, writing to your MP, these initiatives, beautiful initiatives, holding your sign, pull up your brethren, all that I love to do. I love to be a person of change in that aspect. Also, on an academic level, because academics are very important in informing these policies, in informing these grassroots activists, such as us, myself, and so on. On an academic level, I would like to interrogate psychology. I'm MSc in applied psychology. Aiming to interrogate developmental psychology as to why the attachment theory and the attachment infants have to mothers, why there's so much research done there, but not enough, barely any done on attachments to fathers, or mothers are only seen as primary caregivers. So on academic level as well, interrogating those notions on that level. All in all, I love to get people's opinions, hear the perspectives, because that informs my activism as well, my academics and so on. To go about, it just goes full circle. I inform them, them inform me, I inform them, them inform me. I like that approach to changing notions.
Respect, James. And drawing a line, changing notions. Rodrigues, you have been looking at a lot of the lobbying side with high-level panels, but you do a lot of community work. So on one level, you're working at policy, and next level, you're always raising consciousness, you know? Maybe at all levels, we have to raise consciousness. Maybe, can you tell us some of the initiatives that were, you think, successful in your eyes that you may have contributed to, in Guyana in particular?
First of all, I just love that, James. I think it's very important to know that you need to be in your community that you're advocating for. Sometimes we're a bit detached at this, in those levels. And I've actually been in meetings before, and the person are like, why are you speaking on not me, but why are you speaking on my behalf? Things like that. So that's very important to work in communities. As mentioned, but I absolutely love policies. I love policies more than law. Because the Caribbean governments don't like to touch laws. They don't. That's their holy Bible. It's not, we won't do anything with it. But policies is how you could catch them. Because for one, policies are easy. You need consultations, you're fine. And they always say the best way to kill any public policy is a consultation, but there's a way of doing it. And I love that community engagement of doing it. It's not necessarily to guide conversations, that you could use government-funded consultancies to actually have your education campaigns, which is what I always jump on. The government wants a gender and social inclusion policy, fine. But I'm going to go there and tell them, let's expand our mind on what we consider gender to be and what we're going to do with social inclusion. And I think that's one of my most, I don't want to say successful, but I love what I did on the 2019 gender and social inclusion policy. I got LGBT rights to be included in that, simply to put that we don't talk about it enough. It's part of sexual identity, it's part of sexual orientation, gender identity, but there seems to be a gap when it concerns in public policy and law itself. That was written on it. Now, the part to actually the government to action it, that was completely written off. So now they're like, all right, we will admit that we don't talk about LGBT rights enough, but we're not committed to do anything about it. But at least it's there. So that when you organizations, movements, these groups go to like the UPR and the ICHR for international lobbying, they can say the government mentioned this already. It's in a state policy. So that's why I absolutely love policies. We know they're not going to touch the law, but at least policies, we could trick them into writing something about it. And why I started liking policies, because I hated that everything to do with sexual and gender minorities had to go around health and HIV specifically. That's all the government knows when it concerns LGBT rights and LGBT persons, HIV specific and STIs and these things. And it annoyed me. It's a casual conversation, right? So it's annoying out of me so much so that I'm like, no, if you're going to mention this, you have to mention what is social determinants of health around HIV, what is causing this particular population to be more vulnerable. So instead of you mentioning LGBT persons to that, you need to mention why they're vulnerable. So the government thankfully decided to do a bit more social programs rather than just putting us as an appendix to HIV. A few years ago, we changed governments after 23 years. I don't know how Guyana is a democracy, we only changed governments after 20 years. But when that changed, the government had a social cohesion program because, yeah, they recognize that ethnicity is a big thing, but there are other intersectionalities that they generally ignore. Yet for some reason, I know Trinidad and Guyana, being that, we're not really monocultural, the Indians and the indigenous peoples, all of that, the government decided to actually structure a program that will include all these little groups into a social cohesion program. And then again, LGBT persons were excluded, and they invited consultations. As I say, you could sneak into consultations and open your mouth. And I did, and thankfully, sexual orientation and gender identity were included in the social cohesion program and policy and plan. The sad thing about policies is that when you change governments can easily just rewrite, change, and policies. I realize in the Caribbean, they're written to have and not necessarily to use. So as I said, if the government is not going to use policies, that doesn't mean that people can't. They can always say, you wrote this, and this is a benchmark to at least do more. And right now, fingers crossed, I signed, work. I'm supposed to be, or I'm gearing up to work with the government to update the gender and social inclusion policy. And then again, I was having this discussion with America earlier, it's to it's to snake. I think because all of us in this room, you are all academics, you're going to be in government, you're going to be in NGOs, you're going to be at the UN. No matter where you slip into, you need to be strategic. You can't just do things to do it. You have to play the game. And anytime you go into a meeting with a politician, you have to know it's a chess game you're playing. Give and take, which moves to make, what you want to put out, things like that. And I'm excited to play that game with them now that I'm going into the government system, into the state system. And given that I'm the one who's going to be coordinating, that, I really want, it's a hope of mine, a stronger Caribbean when it concerns academics, gender, statistic departments, government and non-government. We really need to have a structured regional gender program. And if you look at it, when you Google or research anything about CARICOM, their Human and Social Development Committee or Council has nothing to do, nothing at all about gender equality, gender development, all these things. And then it's to define on the CARICOM level, what really are you talking about when you say development? For them, it's strictly economical. They always talk about integration and trade and all of that. But then how do you put a gender perspective on that? Are you leaving gender minorities? Are you leaving women? Are you for once going to define or put somewhere in a strategic paper trans persons? So all those things I really think about, and that's why I like policies, because they help craft the bigger messaging that comes from government. And my hope is the Caribbean government publishes some sort of document to really define these persons, be far from HIV, but more into social inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, there's many points there, and but one thing it did drive is the capacity we have to, work in the state and to bring about changes. But a second thing is that groups are not just about the vulnerabilities. No, vulnerabilities exist for groups, but they are also citizens, right? And they have rights that they are guaranteed. And making them an appendage to a crisis or epidemic or some pain and struggle is a way to dehumanize a group, to always render them as sick, oppressed, hurt, vulnerable, and marginal, And I think that was definitely a job.
I do have an assignment for anyone here. Just read your country's report, your country's response to the UPR report. You're going to find some interesting responses from your governments. Because governments and NGOs in your respective countries will put LGBT rights on the platform, and the government has the most creative ways you can imagine on responding to that. Most creative ways. You're going to have a laugh, but you're going to feel sad after. But just read your country's UPR response.
I think we have a little more to do, man. Thanks very much, man, Rodrigues. I want to just go with one question before we give way to the class. I think it's very substantive in terms of what has been discussed. In the following weeks, we'll be looking at the issue of violence in a broader sense. Some of my research is going on violence and gangs and masculine identity formation there, and the type of interventions that we can make and the interventions that take place, which do not take into account a gender perspective, and we're trying to redress conflict. But violence is internalized. Violence is within the household. There are public forms of violence. So I would love to hear about some of the work that you do or things that you're exploring right now around confronting violence, in a feminist conscious way. I could start with Saajid, Hosein. So let me know what the vibe is.
When it comes to violence, I don't know that the only work that I've done like really explicitly with regards to challenging violence is like my work with catcalls. Violence is also something that we discuss in the Young Men's Development Program. I think with whatever I've done and whatever I do with regards to violence, the point that I always try to drive home is that violence is not something, it's something that happens spontaneously between individuals, obviously, but it's not just something that happens at an individual level. It's something that happens, we talk about the 4 I's a lot: the individual, the interpersonal, the institutional, the ideological. Men's violence, and we'll talk about this when we talk about Kaufman and all of that, right? But men's violence against other men and against women, it happens at an ideological and institutional level, right? It happens at a level where it's justified in the structure and frameworks of our society. And, you know, we have lots of people who would immediately question that and respond to that by saying, well, women could be violent too. Women abuse their male partners a lot. And feminists don't try to deny that. You know, there's this stereotype that feminists are like sweeping women's violence under the rug or something. But feminists don't try to deny that. But, you know, what I always tell people is, if you could think of a woman who is being violent against a man in her life, she's usually not doing it from a perspective of female supremacy. I am a woman and I can't have this man that, you know, having power over me. You know, it's usually like a very individual case and scenario. Whereas when men are violent, it's connected to a wider ideology. And then there are frameworks within our institutions, within the media, the music that we listen to, the religions that we subscribe to, that also account for, justify, normalize, right, that violence and take away accountability from it. So I think that's one of the main ideas that I try to drive home whenever I do work around violence, which is that anybody can be violent, anybody can enact violence, but men's violence happens at an institutional level. And even when we understand the fact that men are actually more so the victims of violence overall than women, it's usually at the hands of other men, because we are literally living in a society that trains men, encourages them to be violent in multiple different ways, depending on their respective context. So yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Yeah, Hosein. James, jump in, please.
Right, yeah, coming in here now on a more organizational level with Ignite, IGS Ignite. I once spoke to the young men of QRC regarding sexual violence and consent and so on. And what I realized, a lot of the gentlemen in this world, young fellas in this world, they have in their mind the idea or the ideal of preserving safety, preserving life. Yet they can't explain why they prefer not to and enact these such things as violence, this beating upon themselves, beating upon each other, beating upon women. So just speaking to them, trying to tease out these ideas, bringing to consciousness the knowledge that they already have to not do, what to do, what can you do? So I just love to bring it to surface, because a lot of people, everybody know, just tease it out, bring it to consciousness. You can't ignore it what's in your conscience. Bring it to light. On a more personal level, I tell you, I love you personal, because so much could be done to impact one life, and that life impact one other life, and so on and so on and so on. Because you get deeper working. And from that level, I myself perform a type of masculinity that is safer for everyone. Encourage my friends, colleagues, themselves to perform a type of masculinity that is safer for themselves. Preserve their life, preserve their safety, preserve safety of other persons. If somebody disrespects you verbally, all right, peace be. Take it up to God in prayer. Save your life, save their life. I myself, from love, until I speak to my friends from Barataria, Picton, all different areas, I try my best, my utmost best, and it works. It works until level them on a personal level. They can understand. I want you to save your life. Don't have me begging for your life, for your soul to go to heaven. You know, once you get on them on a personal level, everybody understands, and I love to get on there. Right. Another thing I do, shut down hegemonic masculine ideals once you hear them. I want to change my idea the other day. No, to get patch whatever it is. And two ladies walking up Percy Street. The fella changing tires say, that one, I can only do that one if I get punched. And the other one, anytime she wants. And I'm like, sorry, excuse? Apparently, he forget what he said just now. Calling it out, identifying it. I tell you, once he knows you're not supposed to say it, he knows that that's not the way to think of people, an individual. Once you call it out, other people, some people recognize what these stupidness does do sometimes. And I love to do that, because we all know better. bring it, actually bring it to consciousness, and that is consciousness raising. I love to do that. That is how I do it in my daily life and on a larger level as well.
Rodrigues.
You know, I love that violence is cultural in the region. It very much is, because the colonial structures of our society, the foundation of who we are as a people, is violent. And, you know, we always say this, how many times you emancipate yourself from mental. We reached it yet. We really not there. We're just a bunch of young states figuring ourselves out, and we're putting the global north perspective on development over our own people and society, which is very sad. It's moving resources away from developing ourselves as a people into what our economy is supposed to look like to please them. So we're a violent society, and heteronormative and patriarchal attitudes, norms, all of these exist, and that's what's backing all of this. As my opening statement was, it's really about your personal values and what you can do with your powers, your positionality, your influence to be part of the change. You can't just talk about it as advocates. I hate advocates who just talk. I'm like, what are you doing? With that being said, you know, it is a union, it is a movement with that coming around. And I can remember a time, Mashramani is like our Republic Day Festival Carnival, like, and I was there, you know, and just the premise of what those environments are like for women. And even recently, your Ministry of something published, you know, statements focusing on what women can do to protect themselves. And I read this and I'm like, how many times are we going to have this conversation? Personally, I was walking a time, you know, and a gentleman, big strapping man, you know, he cat calling a woman, hey baby, you know, stuff. I was like, hey, don't do that. That's not right, you know. You're harassing a woman. He watched me and he's like, he's one of them homosexuals. I was like, yes, I actually am, but regardless of that, you are harassing that woman. You're making her uncomfortable. She didn't respond to you. And he watched me dead in my face. He said, you know what? All right, respect, brethren. All right, I can keep that. And I was shaking, mind you. I was trying to like, oh, yeah, yes, actually, but no, I was shaking. But I understood with that engagements, you know, assess your environment and all of that. But if you can do something, and it doesn't go all, that's not all the cases. I did that just a couple of weeks ago to someone and he argued with me that that's not harassment. Who said that's harassment? Can you find me the law that says that's harassment? And indeed, I can't find the law that specifies that street harassment is. It's not written. But you know, generally it is. And many things that's not written in our laws and constitution, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means we have lazy politicians and we need to be that change. And, you know, sexual abuse is something else, you know, is violence that we, when we talk about violence, we always stick to domestic violence. So because that's the big one indeed. But as Saajid said, you know, violence exists, it's institutional, it's everywhere you go, it's ingrained in our society, you know. Darron shared the same sentiment. But I had a personal experience where one of my friends was accused, was cancelled, allegations of rape, sexual harassment, abuse. And I'm like, you know, I don't care what you have to say, what statement, whatever. What I'm going to tell you is you still have a position of power that you can use no matter what you do. My advice to you before you run to a lawyer to defend yourself is to publish or read up until what your actions would have done, what your instinct is going to say. Read up on how that's going to affect other people. And most importantly, research to provide the resources to support survivors rather than you being on the defense. I know your natural instinct is, oh, I didn't do that, but please reflect on what you've done, what you think, how you're going to respond. It's very hard for us as men. We jump on the defense, fine, you know, you're naturally going to feel like that. But I think it just comes from a place that, you know, comprehensive sexuality education is very, very important and lacking in this region. They group it up to something called health and family life education, that it's one of the most bullshit pieces of programs that's it's ridiculous, and no one is doing anything about it. No, well, advocates are doing things. People are even going into classrooms and doing it themselves. But if we were to be educated on what sexual harassment is, abuse, healthy relationships, identifying red flags on your unhealthy relationship, we would see so many things in our society that needs to change, and we would be able to know how to respond to certain things, including what are the laws that exist that not only protect our women from violence, but are there to make sure that they get the gender justice, the social justice that that they need. And we need to read, as men, we need to educate ourselves on just that. Reading what's available for women and minorities, and not only that, using our positionality, I keep saying this, as men. With that, when we find the gaps, we need to work on the gaps. So there are lots of gaps out there. So advocacy is more than just advocating for the gaps, is that you really need to structure it and even propose how you're going to fill those things. I think that's my contribution to that answer. Yes, catcall, GBV, violence, yeah. And to conclude that very answer, no Caribbean government has defined violence and gender-based violence and domestic violence. They've not even gone to the grain of why we're a violent society. So no matter what they propose, it's not going to work. It's not. It's a plaster on a gaping wound that's been bleeding since Massa started whipping the indigenous and genociding the indigenous people. And it's just getting what the statistics are going up. And I hate this argument that, is it that violence is increasing or the reporting and the newspaper and the media is picking it up? It's both. Violence is increasing, and yes, the media resources, they are picking it up because it's something we can no longer ignore in society. They're trying very hard to, but we really can't say we are a progressive Caribbean society, a regional grouping, all trying to work as one Caribbean, welcome home, and we are not looking at why our people are not being able to access the development, social development that they desperately need. Thank you.
Yeah, man. For sure. To the class, did you have any questions here by chance? I want to give way. Well, then we don't do that same thing now.
I actually wanted to get your opinion on what modern day feminism versus what feminism started off as, because a lot of people, they don't identify with feminism anymore. They more see it as equalism. They more identify with that term versus feminism, because a lot of modern day feminists, they bring down men and praise women instead of seeing them as equal. And that's seen like through a lot of music too sometimes. So yeah, I just wanted to get your view on that.
Come off TikTok, Mongol. Come off TikTok. TikTok, the movement bigger than TikTok. But James Hosein and Rodrigues jumping now and all that. You can take one.
James did talk about feminist movements and feminist spaces, which I like because I was like, I didn't think about that before. My take on it is and I see there's a reference here to radical feminism. Yes, and there's TERF now, which is trans exclusionary radical feminism. That's it, right? It's a movement that's coming out. Even within the LGBT movement, there is an active movement now called the LGBT Alliance, which is against transgender persons in the LGBT movement itself. So when James was talking, I was thinking about that. How are we really defining feminism? Because it depends on the new age feminism, which I'm part of, gender and development. It recognizes that it's inclusionary, that everyone needs to be, put their hands on the table, work towards this, particularly men. It realizes that you can't take men out of the picture, which, Radical feminism, on the other hand, actually has that view that even trans persons are men who are trying to take feminist spaces away from them. It is a view that's, rising and all of that. And then, of course, is the Caribbean feminism, which, birthed out to that idea of development as a young national thing. My answer to that is, yes, I personally think radical feminism is harmful to the movement. or also the whole thing about feminism and new age feminism, all of that, is that you really need to look at it from the perspective of development, defining what development is, socioeconomic, political, all that, intersectionalities that exist. And as James mentioned, you can be a supporter, an ally to it, and as well, the position of Amilcar and myself is that more than allies, we're actually doing something to give, power share, to give that support, to educate our fellow men, to educate everyone, and to include sexual and gender minorities. There's so many ways to it in intersectionalities, but we need to make it work.
Saajid, I'll allow you to quickly respond, and then after I want to take up Maria's question to everyone, and we could close there.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I think when we talk about modern feminism versus traditional feminism, first of all, we're putting feminism into very neat categories that don't really encompass the very complex and fluid and vast field that is feminism as a movement, as a body of knowledge, as an epistemology, as an academic field of study, as a field of scholarship. Feminism is vast, and to say something like, modern day feminists put men down, that's a huge generalization. And what happens is people will see maybe certain vocal people who call themselves feminists on social media or TikTok or whatever, say something that might come across a bit misandrous or whatever, and then that gets applied to or imposed on the entire feminist movement. This is a university classroom, a course in which you are given feminist scholarship to read. You're reading people like Rhoda Reddock, right? And, if you take many of our courses, you'll read people, you're reading people like Christine Barrow, Barry Shabans, you'll read people also like my employers, Patricia Mohammed, right? All of these people, right? So I would encourage you, Haley, as well as all of y'all, to read the Caribbean feminist scholarship, and not just like academic scholarship, but writing, and look at what, feminist scholars, thinkers, activists, right? Advocates in the field, look at the work that they are doing and look at the results of their work and judge the feminist movement by that. Do not judge it by these ideas that circulate on Twitter or TikTok or whatever. And radical feminism is also something that can't be boxed into one thing. Unfortunately, nowadays, because of like the trans exclusionary feminists, who I do not personally consider to be radical, because in my opinion, to be radical is to be transformative, and being transphobic is not transformative, therefore it's not radical. So I actually find the term TERF to be a misnomer. They should just be called TEFs, trans exclusionary feminists, or TE, because I don't like to consider them feminists either, right? Yes, there's, the older brand of radical feminism that was, some aspects of it might have had that sort of like hatred towards men, but that again is a generalization. Radical feminism is about, in general, dismantling the system of patriarchy as opposed to trying to fit into it. When you learn about the different types of feminisms, for those of you who might be doing feminist theoretical frameworks, I think is the name of that course. So yeah, my answer to that question about like old school feminism versus new school feminism, equalist and all of that kind of stuff, feminism is for everybody. Feminism, if you actually read the readings that we give you and you listen to your tutors and to your lecturer, you would know that feminism helps men as well. It is a movement and a field of scholarship that also actually helps men, because it's about deconstructing notions of gender, right? So it's not just about like uplifting women and leaving men behind, but it's about deconstructing those harmful notions of gender that, yes, are created to benefit men, but also in many ways it negatively affects them as well, right? So I think the solution to a question like that is to really immerse yourself in feminist scholarship, thinking, advocacy, and work. Really do your research and really don't just look at like what popular, white girls are saying on TikTok about sexism, right? Really look into the long-standing tradition of Caribbean feminism, and you will see, you'll begin to understand why a question like that doesn't really do justice to the movement. Not that it was a bad question, it was a good question, Healy, and I'm glad that you brought it up. And I understand why you asked that question, and I understand why so many people have that question. It's a good question. But I think it's a question that requires the person who's asking it to say, okay, I'm gonna have to look into this a little bit more. And that's what I encourage everybody in this class to do. So thanks, Haley, so much for that question.
Yeah, and I would just to add upon that is for all of us to reflect that, and Hosein was alluding to it, that people also have personalities, some people energy just low and they cool and they calm, and when you're around them, they could say the most prejudiced thing and they're like, but they have a point. But it's just because their vibe just more normal. And some people really on the side of justice, energy just heavy. And you even want to follow them because I don't want to follow you. Not that your idea bad. Sometimes your vibe. So you also realize no one activist is kind of represent a view, or a school of thought. Sometimes you just need to find your tribe. This person reflect my values. This person always lit. This person always aggressive. If you don't go to FET with all your friends, why you think you should be doing politics and struggles for liberation with all the activists? It's the same way. It's like a human thing too. And I think we need to have some grace with that, how we give ourselves and other people, see them in different life stages and the choices they're making. So that is one. And a second thing is, but don't think about feminism too far, It is Nadia Batson. Gala is now your man, is your manager. It is Destra Garcia, Lucy, right? And it is the plantation society and liberation. It is indigenous women trying to fight for rights and dignity, So don't look too far for it as well, Always the world is your culture to draw on, but it's also right among us. People are speaking about resisting the boundaries and arbitrary rules we create for all kind of people. And that is important, I think, to think about. We will close on the last question by Marie. Each one will just wrap up. I really appreciate the feedback from the class so far, right? So Marie, thank you for your question. And she wants to know if you always had these views on feminism, or did your opinion grow and change over time? We'll close with Rodrigues. He's very charismatic, So let's start with James and then we'll go Hosein and then Rodrigues.
For me, I was not born with this. As I told my colleagues in the tutorial with me, I actually had quite homophobic, even misogynistic views to a point until I myself was saved from the saved. I just start saying saved by feminism and being introduced to IGDS Ignite. I was freed from some of the most hegemonic masculinity you could find. I was freed from that by understanding myself and understanding the world. So I did not have these views. I changed from hegemonic masculinity to the masculinity I feel to do. So I did not have these. And they change, but they are still changing because new experiences in life, new content I'll be introduced to. These things I embedded in me when I was 19 is when I began thinking differently. So there's 19 years of deep training that I still have to dig out on me. So I ain't done yet. I ain't done my transformation yet. I'm still transforming. So while I'm still transforming, I'll pass it to somebody else.
Yeah, I was pretty much always a feminist. Did I always have that word to label my feelings and my views? No, but ever since I've known myself, I have always been more empathetic towards women and their struggles. And that's partly because of two things. The first is that I grew up around more women, and I grew up around women being my main support system as opposed to men. That was also reinforced by the fact that men have traumatized me growing up because of the fact that I don't fit into the molds of masculinity. the standards of masculinity that exist in our society. I have always been policed, rejected, corrected, and all of that kind of stuff, right? So I've always been drawn to feminist ideas, politics, and point of views, even back when I was younger and I didn't have the word feminism to attach to that. So yeah, I always had these views. They have, of course, become more nuanced and developed as I have, taken these courses in undergrad and eventually went on to do my master's in gender studies. And one of the things that I think is really important and that I continue to try to incorporate into my feminist views is the importance of multiple realities and intersecting realities, as Rodrigues kept talking about with intersectionality, right? And that's the driving force behind my work. Maybe not so much the concept of intersectionality itself, but living multiple realities and living under multiple categories. So my work is about masculinity. My thesis, it's about masculinity in the Caribbean context, but as it intersects with being a descendant of indenture and also being Muslim. And so my feminism evolves to be more inclusive, but not just more inclusive, I don't know if that's the right word, but to be more conscious of how feminism connects to everything else. It's not something that exists in a vacuum, but it connects to things like the Caribbean experience of race. It connects to how religion functions in the region. It connects to our history. It connects to everything that has to do with us. It connects deeply to sexuality and sexual orientation. So as my feminism evolves, it continues to evolve with a lens that tries to understand the world in its full complexity, but also focusing on how gender plays a role in all of that. And that's ultimately, to me, what feminism is all about.
Rodrigues.
That's the thing. Same, even before I knew what feminism was, I always had that value because just growing up in a society, witnessing violence and knowing instinctively that was not okay. And knowing that I've always been outspoken. So let me use this voice for something. Let me use my energies, my skills for something. And that to me was to have a level playing field, have equality and justice for all my people. And even before my own identity as a gay man, it was like I knew, I know instinctively this is what I felt before I even had a name for it. No one educated me about this. So my feminism grew as I grew as a person. I'm still challenging it. Everywhere I go, every position I remember when I worked for this organization that says they were LGBT, they were SRHR, but they weren't doing much on LGBT rights. I wore heels to work one day just to see the reaction of everyone. And some people were like, what are you doing? I was like, are you not supportive of persons' identities and expressions and, gender bending and all these things? Never worn heels before. I did that day throughout the entire day just to expand my own co-workers' minds. Even in my own family, I do that. Like, I bought a kilt because I thought it was cool. My mom saw me in a kilt. She's like, why would you wear this? I was like, I'm wearing this on my first day of my government job. And just to be like, okay, if I'm going to be in the gender department, I need to at least bend some minds. It's my own way of widening my own comfort, my identity, that word again, intersectionalities. And that's something I had to grow with because I'm an Afro-Indigenous with Indian heritage, Black, Muslim, Caribbean, Amazonian, Guyanese man, all these things interplay with my identity. So I have to grow to love, understand myself, have an environment that would understand me, that I don't necessarily like the word tolerance, but really and truly it is, if we're to be a cohesive society. That feminist idea just grew in me. It didn't spark, it didn't, it just grew as I did as a person. And I'm still growing and I will continue to grow. My thing is though, it's my growth must match my environment. I can't be in somewhere that isn't growing with me. So whether it be my own family, my workplace, any bacchanal, I'm going to be the best person I can be. And if I notice something and it's just not sitting right in the room, whether it be, I did mention like sexist and misogynistic jokes and these things, because my environment must match my values, I will say something about it. And that's just who I am as a person. And I hope that I continue to give myself the opportunity, because sometimes we think we know it all, especially as academics. We think that, oh, this is my field, we're going to stop there. No, we need to continue reading, expanding, learning, and even pushing our own selves to be the best person we want to be in this society.
Thanks very much, Rodrigues, James, and Hosein.